County, specifically in the 70s of the last century, there was a homosexual killer luring children and boys to his home with a trick. Inside his house, the victims are subjected to a series of crimes that begin with rape and often end with murder. At the end of that decade, the Chicago community was shocked and they learned that John Wayne Gacy, the owner of many social and humanitarian initiatives, was behind these crimes. John Wayne Gacy is an American serial killer and rapist who was born in Chicago, Illinois on March 17, 1942. He is the owner of PDM, a Democratic circuit captain, and a member of a number of local clubs. He was known as Pogo or Patches the Clown, for his portrayal of these characters in hospitals and celebrations. Involved in rape and murder of at least 33 people, most of them children. Childhood. In his childhood, John suffered from his father's harsh treatment. His alcoholic father would beat him frequently in the basement of the house and call him bad words such as, "You're stupid and an idiot." His father also used to compare him to his sisters and describe him as gay. From what John remembers from that period is that one day his father beat him with a razor wire because he messed with the arrangement of the car parts. At a young age, fainting cases began to haunt John, in addition to appendicitis, which necessitated his transfer to the hospital and his stay there several times. As a result, his academic level dropped due to his absence from school, and his father thought that he was lying. Morgue employee. In his last year of high school, and after moving between 4 schools, John dropped out of school and began his working life, holding many jobs. One of them was interesting, later, a job as an assistant in a morgue. And he worked in the Palm Funeral Memorial Morgue. His task was to transport the bodies from the hospital to the funeral home. The wage for the job was not enough to obtain independent housing, so he was allowed to sleep in the hospital building. While doing this, John learned how to clean and embalm corpses. Except that he was not employed together, he was doing some strange behavior at night. When he was alone in the building, John would not only examine and talk to corpses, but he would also take off their clothes and put them next to the coffin. John continued in this way until one day the manager suspected him and informed the police, so he was fired from work. Some believe that John used his experience in this job to hide his crimes later. Rapist John. In August 1967, John sexually assaulted 15-year-old Donald Voorhees. 6 months after the incident, Donald Voorhees told his father about the matter, who immediately notified the police. Police arrested John and charged him with sexual assault of Donald and attempted assault of 16-year-old Edward Lynch. Of course, he faced the charges by refusing to take a lie detector test. At his request, he was given the test, but John was tense while answering the questions and failed the test. On November 7, 1968, he pleaded guilty to involvement in the Donald Voorhees case, but was not convicted of the rest of the charges. On December 3, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison in Anamosa State. On June 18, 1970, John was granted parole after serving 18 months in prison. He was placed on probation for a year, and his release included some conditions, which are that he move in with his mother in Chicago and not go around, curfew system, after 10 p.m. On February 12, 1971, John was accused of sexually assaulting a teenager, luring him into his car at a Chicago Greyhound station and taking him home before raping him. The court dismissed the case because the boy did not appear. On the 22nd of June of the same year, a young man filed a complaint against him and claimed that he tricked him into using a police badge to get into his car and then sexually assaulted him. John was arrested and charged with aggravated sexual assault and reckless behavior. But these charges were dropped after the plaintiff tried to blackmail him. New page. In the 1970s, John Wayne Gacy tried to gain strength and status in order to gain confidence and put himself beyond suspicion. So that he can reach his goal, he had to make a change in his life. The process of change began with his move from Chicago to the town of Norwood Park, located in Cook County. In the village of Norwich, John bought a house with financial help from his mother and started a construction company in Chicago called BDM. After that, he volunteered to be the captain of the Democratic Department in his region, and held many parties that were attended by more than 400 people, including a number of officials. And because he was a member of the local Moose Club, he was able to join the Clown Club and created his character Pogo or Patches the Clown in late 1975. Those changes that occurred in his personality were not a positive indicator, because during that period in which he was doing good deeds, he was committing more serious crimes than he had previously done. John the Killer. It was in his new home in Cook County that John Wayne Gacy carried out all the murders, and buried the majority of his victims. It targeted children and boys by personal knowledge or randomly. His hunting grounds for his victims were the Greyhound bus station in Chicago, the Bug House yard, and also the streets. He was also signing his victims with several tricks, including promises of a job in his company, and that he would give them a lot of money through his work in it. On the evening of January 2, 1972, 16-year-old Jack McCoy was at the Greyhound bus stop in Chicago, going to his father's house in Omaha, Nebraska. That evening John left a family party and went to the same bus stop. Jack persuaded McCoy to get into his car, take him for a sightseeing ride, and then drive him home. He told him he could spend the night at his house and promised that he would take him back to the station when his bus arrived. Later, John claimed that when he woke up the next morning, he found Jack standing in the doorway of his room with a knife in his hand. John thought that Jack wanted to kill him, so he pounced on him, and when he was trying to let go of the knife from his hand, Jack was telling him that he was wrong and that he understood the matter in the wrong way, and he unintentionally tilted his hand, and John's forearm was wounded, and then he pulled the knife from Jack's hand and hit his head against the wall of the room and then kicked him to his wardrobe. And here Jack hit him in the stomach, but John dropped him to the ground and stabbed him in the chest several times. Then he buried him under his house and covered his grave with a layer of cement. In January 1974, John kills again, but the victim remains unidentified. In his confessions, John stated that he strangled the victim until she died and then put the body in his closet before burying it. On July 31, 1975, 18-year-old John Wayne Gacy, PDM, employee John Butkovich disappeared. His car was found near Sheridan and Lawrence Station, and inside it were his coat, wallet and car keys. The day before his disappearance, John Butkovich claimed his 2 weeks' arrears. Based on a later confession, John Wayne said his employee Butkovich approached his car and said, "I want to talk to you." John Wayne invited him into the car and then took him home on the pretense of ending the back pay issue. At his house, he was offered a drink, then surprised him and handcuffed him behind his back. Then he sat on his chest before strangling him to death. Finally, he buried the body under the concrete floor of the garage. John the Ripper. In 1976, John Wayne Gacy divorced for the second time. Some of his neighbors noticed changes in his behavior after the divorce. And between 1976 and 1978 he committed most of his crimes and then turned from a murderer into a serial killer. He says that after his separation from his wife, he found more freedom in carrying out his plans. In 1976, his crimes reached their peak, as the number of his victims was estimated at 15. One of those victims is a 17-year-old PDM employee named Gregory. Before his disappearance, Gregory told his family that John had asked him to do some repair work on his house. But later, Gregory's car was found at an area called the Nile. John's parents and older sister contacted John, but John claimed to have run away from home and also told his family that he had received a letter from Gregory shortly after his disappearance. The family asked for the letter, but John said he had erased it. In 1977, John carried out 10 crimes, including 9 murders and rape, one of which was limited to rape and torture only. The only surviving victim that year was 19-year-old Robert Donnelly. John kidnapped him from a Chicago bus station at gunpoint. At his home, John tortured and raped Robert, then dipped his head in a bathtub until he passed out. Hours later, he took him to his place of work and released him, then told him not to report to the police, because they would not believe him. The following year, Robert reported the assault to the police and John was interrogated on January 6, 1978, but the criminal escaped justice after making false allegations that the police believed. The year 1978 saw the end of John Wayne Gacy's series of crimes. In that year, John carried out 7 crimes, including 6 murders and rape, and included a single survivor as well. Among these crimes, one was the reason for revealing the truth about the criminal to the authorities, which is the murder and rape of 15-year-old Robert Best. On the afternoon of December 11, John visited Nissan's pharmacy in Des Plaines to discuss a business deal with the store's owner. Close to Robert Best, John said his company often gives its teenage employees a starting wage of $5 an hour. In other words, nearly twice what Robert is making. Shortly after John left, Robert's mother arrived to take her son home as usual. But Robert told his mother to wait because, he said, some contractors wanted to talk to him about a well-paying job. He left the store at 9 p.m. and promised his mother he would be back soon. After 10 p.m. at John's house, the criminal handcuffed Robert and then tortured and raped him. Then he tied a rope around Robert's neck, who was crying in fear. Meanwhile, John receives a phone call from an acquaintance regarding business, simply letting Robert choke to death on his bedroom floor. Investigations.